Everyone in the room turned to stare when Private Lila removed her jacket. The whispers started instantly, hushed tones laced with judgment and disbelief. Among the loudest was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the unit, who sneered with disgust. "What the hell happened to your back?" she spat, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lila froze, her hands trembling, but before she could respond, the door burst open, and in walked General Hargrove. The moment his eyes landed on Lila's scars, the entire room fell silent. His face turned pale. "Where did you get those?" he asked, his voice shaking. Karen's smug grin vanished. No one knew what was coming next. Everyone in the room turned when Private Lila Briggs removed her jacket during drill prep. The scar tissue across her upper back was impossible to ignore. Deep ridges, pale and cruel, crawling like twisted vines over otherwise perfect posture. She hadn't meant to draw attention, but in a room full of newly enlisted Marines still obsessed with rank, appearance, and bravado, she was suddenly a target. Karen McAllister, the loudest voice in the squad and daughter of a high-ranking officer, let out a snort loud enough to silence the minor chatter around her. "Oh my God," she said dramatically. "What did you get dragged through? A meat grinder?" A few Marines chuckled nervously. Some looked away, uncomfortable, but Karen wasn't done. "Seriously, what are you even doing here? Thought this was a military base, not a rehab center." Lila didn't flinch. Her training had taught her to stand tall, especially in moments like this. She didn't give Karen the satisfaction of a reaction, even as her fingers unconsciously curled into fists. Then the door opened. Sharp boots hit concrete. A hush swept over the room like a cold gust of wind. General Hargrove, the grizzled veteran whose name echoed through every hall like a warning, entered with his eyes scanning the room. Karen straightened immediately, her smugness hardening into performative discipline. The general's gaze moved across the squad and stopped when he saw Lila's back. His face, usually unreadable, shifted. His eyes narrowed, and he froze mid-step. The entire room felt the shift in energy. "Private Briggs," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Where did you get those scars?" Karen's face twitched, confusion breaking through her facade. Lila turned slowly. "Sir," she said with quiet authority, "they're from the Operation Ember mission. 5 years ago. I wasn't enlisted then. I was part of the civilian evac unit under the State Department's Emergency Relief Branch." The room didn't breathe. Ember had become legend, one of the most harrowing extraction failures in modern military history. Few details had ever made it to public record, but the few who survived were whispered about with reverence. No one had connected Lila to it. "You were there?" the general asked, stepping closer. Lila nodded. "I pulled 3 injured children out of the wreckage after the bombing. Took the hit when the second blast went off." Karen blinked. "Wait, that Ember? She's the civilian who dragged 2 SEALs through a collapsing school with a shattered shoulder and 3rd-degree burns," the general interrupted coldly, staring daggers at Karen. "And you mocked her scars." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The room was dead silent. The general looked back at Lila. "I recommended the Medal of Civilian Valor for that mission. It was denied due to classified circumstances, but I never forgot your name." There were tears in Lila's eyes now, though she blinked them back. Then the general turned toward the squad. "You all think toughness is about chin-ups and field drills? Let me make something clear. Courage doesn't come with rank or clean skin. Courage comes with pain, with scars. This woman," he gestured to Lila, "has already lived through hell and chose to come serve next to you. You'd be lucky to have half her spine." Karen shrank. Her arrogance dissolved like frost and fire. She looked down, finally realizing what everyone else now saw clearly. This wasn't just about a scar. It was about a history of survival and sacrifice far greater than her own inflated ego. After the general left, no one spoke. Karen sat in silence. Lila quietly put her jacket back on, walking out with the same quiet dignity she'd arrived with. But something had changed. The sneers stopped. The whispering turned to respect. Later that night, Lila found a handwritten note slipped into her locker. No name. Just 5 words. I was wrong. I'm sorry. She didn't need a signature. She already knew. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. Not just as a soldier, but as a survivor finally seen. The next morning, the base felt different. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the barracks buzzed quietly with the kind of uneasy anticipation usually reserved for deployment orders. No one said it out loud, but something had shifted after General Hargrove's visit. And at the center of it all was Lila Briggs. Karen sat silently on her bunk, arms crossed, trying to make sense of what she'd witnessed. She hadn't slept much. Her pride, usually a fortress, had taken a hit, and not from a rival, but from someone she'd dismissed as weak. Her father had always told her scars were a sign of failure, but now she wondered if he'd ever seen scars that told stories like Lila's. Lila, meanwhile, moved through the mess hall like a shadow. Not withdrawn, just centered, composed. The usual murmurs that followed her had gone quiet. Even the ones who hadn't mocked her before now looked at her with something like reverence. She didn't bask in it. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke for itself. But not everyone welcomed the change. In the far corner, Corporal Darius Finch leaned over his tray, eyes narrowing. "She's got everyone wrapped around her finger now," he muttered to another squadmate. "All because of a few scars and a bedtime story." Karen heard him, and for the first time didn't agree. "That bedtime story is why 3 kids and 2 SEALs are still breathing," she snapped. "You think you'd have pulled anyone out of a burning school?" Finch looked surprised. Karen defending someone else was rare. Defending Lila? Unheard of. But Karen wasn't doing it for Lila. She was doing it because something inside her had cracked open. A question had taken root. What if everything she thought made someone strong, status, heritage, medals, was wrong? Later that day, drills resumed. The squad was assigned a new training scenario: casualty extraction under simulated fire. Most struggled. Finch dropped, a dummy halfway through. Karen hesitated during a smoke grenade release. But Lila? She moved with terrifying precision, wrapping a tourniquet, dragging the weight, navigating smoke, all while shouting orders the others instinctively followed. The drill sergeant stopped the clock early. "Textbook," he muttered, pointing to Lila. "That's what real field instinct looks like." Afterward, Karen caught up with Lila by the water tanks. "Hey," she said, clearing her throat. "About the other day." Lila turned slowly, wiping her face with a towel. "Yeah?" "I was an ass," Karen said plainly. "I judged you before I knew anything, and I'm sorry." Lila studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thanks." Karen looked down. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "What happened after the explosion? Like, how did you survive that?" Lila took a deep breath. She hadn't told anyone on base the full story, not even the general. "The second blast buried us. I was half conscious, pinned under debris, heard the kids crying, couldn't move my left arm. I thought I was going to die." Karen swallowed, the image burning into her mind. "Then I heard boots. Thought it was help, but it wasn't. It was looters. Locals scavenging the rubble. One of them saw me, came close. I played dead. He stepped over me and started digging through the kids' backpacks." Karen's stomach turned. "I waited until he turned his back. Then I grabbed a metal rod and hit him hard enough to break my own wrist." Karen stared. "And you still carried them out?" "Yeah," Lila said softly. "Because no one else was coming." For the first time in her life, Karen didn't know what to say. Her entire worldview had been built around strength, defined by power, not resilience. But standing in front of Lila, she saw something she'd never truly understood. Quiet courage. The kind that doesn't boast. the kind that survives. That night, a surprise announcement hit the squad. A joint survival mission, selected by General Hargrove himself. 4 Marines would be dropped into a remote terrain for 3 days. No tech, no backup, just training and instinct. Leading the team? Private Lila Briggs. Karen's name was on the list too. She didn't feel ready, but maybe that was the point. The Black Hawk's rotor blades chopped through the humid dawn sky, slicing the silence as the survival team was airlifted into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. No comms, no GPS, just 4 Marines, their training, and the looming expectation that this mission would separate the strong from the reckless. Karen sat across from Lila inside the helicopter, staring at her gloved hands. She couldn't stop replaying Lila's story about the explosion, the looters, the rod, the kids. That kind of survival was raw. It wasn't about medals or bravado. It was about something primal, something Karen had never been forced to tap into. The moment the helicopter landed, the team disembarked, and the rotors kicked up a whirlwind of pine needles and dust. Lila took point immediately, scanning the terrain. Karen noticed how naturally the others followed her, not because she was loud, but because she never hesitated. Within an hour, the terrain turned brutal. Steep inclines, dense underbrush, ankle-deep mud. One of the Marines, Collins, sprained his ankle on the descent into a ravine. Karen instinctively reached for his pack. "Don't," Lila said sharply. Karen froze. "Why not?" "Take his weapon, not his pack," Lila said calmly. "The pack's weight is punishment. The weapon is survival." Karen blinked. That wasn't in any handbook, but it made sense. Collins needed to feel the discomfort, to stay aware, alert, but never lose the means to defend himself. They made camp before nightfall. Lila organized shifts for fire, perimeter check, and food rationing. Karen watched her move in silence. There was no panic in her, only focus. The kind that could only come from having seen real chaos. That night, Karen took first watch. As the fire crackled beside her, she thought about her father, how he'd hammered into her the idea that discipline was everything, that emotions were distractions, that soldiers didn't cry. But what if he'd been wrong? What if emotions weren't weakness, but fuel? Halfway through her watch, Lila sat beside her without a word. They both stared into the fire for a while before Lila finally spoke. "You were an officer's daughter, right?" Karen raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know?" "You walk like someone who's been taught to lead but hasn't had to earn it." Karen bristled. "That's supposed to be an insult?" "No," Lila said. "Just a reminder. Some of us had to fight to get here. You just have to decide what kind of Marine you want to be now." Karen exhaled slowly. It wasn't said with malice. It was just the truth. And somehow, that hurt more. The next morning, things took a turn. Their compass was useless, the needle spinning erratically. Radio was dead. A fog had crept in overnight, swallowing the woods in a white blur. Lila stood, listening. "We're not lost," she said, "but we're being followed." Karen felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Followed? By what?" Lila's hand hovered near her sidearm. "Don't know. Could be animals. Could be something else." They quickened their pace, moving with heightened awareness. Every snapped twig and distant rustle set nerves on edge. Karen kept close to Lila, watching her eyes scan constantly, calculating. At midday, they stumbled on an abandoned ranger station, half collapsed but usable for shelter. Lila posted guards and started a silent checklist. Karen helped, finally feeling useful, her earlier pride now stripped down to purpose. As night fell, the howls began. Low, distant, too deep to be wolves. The team locked the doors and dimmed the lanterns. Every shadow outside seemed to move. Every creak in the woods sounded like breath. Karen sat against the wall, her rifle across her knees. Her palms were sweating, but she wasn't scared. Not really. She was ready. That's when she noticed Lila, kneeling alone, hands clasped. She wasn't praying, just breathing. Calm, centered. The scars on her face caught the firelight like jagged metals. Karen leaned in. "You ever afraid?" Lila looked up. "Every time." Karen nodded. "But you move anyway, because someone always needs you to." That night, they weren't attacked. But they weren't alone either. In the morning, they found fresh prints around the cabin. Big, barefoot, human. Karen stared at the tracks. "Locals?" "Could be," Lila said. "Could also be they want to see if we panic." And just like that, Lila decided they'd move north. Not the shortest path, but the safest. No one questioned her. By the third day, morale had shifted. Lila wasn't just a scarred Marine anymore. She was the unspoken leader. Even Karen saw it. And for the first time, Karen didn't resent it. She respected it. When the extraction chopper finally descended through the trees, every team member looked ragged, but intact. And when the general met them at the base, he didn't speak to the group. He walked straight to Lila. "Report?" Lila saluted. "Survived, adapted, led." General Hargrove nodded once, then turned to Karen. "And you?" Karen glanced at Lila, then back at the general. "I learned what a real Marine looks like." 2 weeks after the mission ended, Camp Ridgewood returned to its usual rhythm. Grueling drills, endless marching, the scent of sweat and soil hanging heavy in the air. But something had changed beneath the surface. The whispers were gone. The sideways glances at Lila? Gone. Even the senior officers had stopped treating her like a ghost in uniform. Karen stood in front of the mirror inside the barracks locker room. She stared at her own face. No scars, not a mark. But inside, she felt completely different. The girl who once rolled her eyes at Lila, who smirked at her silence and looked down at her trauma, that girl had been stripped away in the wild. She caught a glimpse of Lila behind her. Lila was adjusting the bandage on her forearm. Another scar. Another story. "You ever miss who you were before it happened?" Karen asked, without turning around. Lila paused. "Every day." Karen finally turned. "Then how do you live with it?" Lila looked up, her eyes steady. "Because I'm still here, and I can choose what I do with the version of me that survived." That line stuck with Karen for days. It echoed in her mind during every morning run, every push-up, every weapons check. The scars weren't the story. What came after them was. Soon, word spread that a new high-intensity desert operation was on the table. A joint task force needed volunteers, dangerous terrain, unstable region, high risk of engagement. Karen signed up without hesitation. Not out of bravado, but out of something deeper. A need to test who she had become. Lila didn't sign up. When Karen asked why, Lila simply said, "I don't need to prove it anymore." But before Karen left, Lila handed her something. A folded photograph. Inside it, a worn-out image of Lila with a group of children, laughing, muddy, alive. The date on the back? The same day the world thought she had died. "If fear tries to find you out there," Lila says, "aid. Look at this, and remember why we fight." Karen tucked the photo into her vest and boarded the military transport plane without looking back. 6 months later, a medal ceremony was held at base. Karen had returned from the desert bruised, burned, and decorated. Not for a kill count, but for saving 3 wounded soldiers during a sandstorm ambush while under enemy fire. She had dragged them, bleeding, 2 kilometers through open ground. When asked what gave her the strength, She simply said, "A ghost taught me how to survive." The general awarded her a commendation, but afterward, he pulled her aside. "I've seen thousands of soldiers walk through this place, Karen. Most pretend to be tough. You didn't pretend. You changed." Karen nodded slowly. "It took a scarred Marine to show me what real strength looks like." The general glanced toward the crowd, then asked, "Do you think she knows what she did for you?" Karen followed his gaze and saw Lila standing silently near the back of the hall, away from the spotlight, arms folded. "I think she knows," Karen said, "but she'll never ask to be thanked." That evening, while most of the base was celebrating, Karen walked toward the old training field. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky burned gold. She found Lila alone, sitting on the same bench where it had all started. Karen sat beside her and, without a word, handed her the medal. Lila didn't take it. "It's yours," she said. "No," Karen replied, voice steady. "It's ours." The two women sat in silence as the stars began to pierce the night sky. Two soldiers, bound not by rank or regulation, but by scars that told stories and strength forged in fire. And in that moment, Karen understood something she never had before. Courage wasn't loud. It was quiet, scarred, steady, and sometimes it wore a face the world tried to forget.